obviously there is a reality of war. There is the reality of the politics back at home. But it also feels like some of Putin's allies around the world are tiring of this, that they're beginning to break with him, whether they're actually tired of it or they think Russia is weakened and weaker than they previously thought it could be with a military the size of what we had presumed the military to be. Indian Prime Minister Modi last week said now is not an era of war. Chinese President Xi Jinping has, quote, questions and concerns. Turkish President Erdogan this week says Russia should return Ukraine's land. I want to quote, the lands which were invaded will be returned to Ukraine. This is what is expected. This is what is wanted. I mean, in no uncertain terms, speaking to Putin, how meaningful is it that those men are saying these things at this juncture?
Well, when you run a regime which is based upon the idea that might is right and power is everything, and then you lose a war, obviously you're going to lose credibility around the world. I mean, Putin doesn't actually stand for anything except for the idea that Russia is a superpower, right? The way he's prosecuting this war involves horrible crimes. The things that I saw in Ukraine involved, crimes against humanity, things that amount to genocide. And so in addition to the leaders you list, there are also the people who care about things like that, as well as the Ukrainians themselves. But the fundamental point, I think, with the men that you're mentioning is that he's losing the war. China would be happy to, was happy to have a quick war, but it's not getting a quick war. Just like the Russian population would be happy to have a TV war, but now it's not getting a TV war. And I agree with you, that's why we're at a turning point.
What of Zelensky? You saw him last week. He spoke virtually at the United Nations. Do you have a sense of how much he was prepared for something like this to happen, to the degree that Putin has been sort of telegraphing a ramping up, if you will?
Yeah. We have to distinguish between how we react and how the Ukrainians react, because much of the rhetoric that Putin uses is meant to push our buttons. For example, when he tries to connect the nuclear threat to other things, he's been talking about nuclear war for 6 months, basically uninterrupted, but he knows that that will push our buttons, and he hopes that that will stop us or hinder us or at least slow us down from helping the Ukrainians. The Ukrainians, on the other hand, have already factored this in long ago. They read the Russians much more quickly and effectively than we do, and their fundamental reaction is, this just means we have to win the war by the fall.
Their tenacity and resilience in this has been absolutely stunning. I want to ask you about one last thing as we talk about Putin's standing in Russia. There have been reports from inside Russia that Russian businessmen are dying from suicide, accidents. It sounds like it's the FSB at work, eliminating people who may be threats to Putin's power. 10 people have died under suspicious circumstances since the war in Ukraine began. Do you draw any lines there in terms of Putin's paranoia, his power grabs? I mean, how do you frame that in the context of this war?
I think we're in the late stages of a regime where the various entities among which Putin kept the peace are now beginning to sort of centrifugally separate from one another. There are the Chechens, there's the FSB, there's the army with its loss in prestige, there are the businessmen. There are a lot of things going on. In addition to the deaths, things are blowing up inside Russia. Military recruiting posts are being set on fire, and that's not all the Ukrainians. So it's hard to do the criminology, but I think you're basically right that what we're seeing is that a man who is always the arbiter is losing his ability to hold things together.
That seems both like perhaps there is light at the end of the tunnel, but also like we are in a very unstable and precarious moment.
They always fall. The dictators always fall. You just have to be ready.